All right, guys, we're here at the park. We have our drone here with the Wi-Fi Link2. First flight, this should be pretty cool. And then I have my homemade goggles right here. I do have the receiver right here on the front of the actual box style goggles. My cell phone's already in here, and I did some preliminary testing on my goggles here and my phone. Make sure you have your phone already optimized for this procedure. So we'll conduct 2 tests today. We'll do our first flights with this box style homemade goggles, and then do a second test with the HD0 goggles. We want to see if this is a viable option. So let's turn this stuff on. All right, guys, this should be super exciting here. Take this off. Let's see how this looks. All right, not bad, not bad. Not the best. I can see a lot of pixelations because the cell phone is close to my face, but not bad, guys. Arm, image is not bad. All right. There's some vibration there with the camera. That has to do with the camera mount. Oh, my OSD looks pretty good. Yeah, there's definitely some vibration. I don't like that. So we'll have to find another way to mount this camera without all this vibes. We'll come back here. All right. So far, so good. Really good job. All right, so let's go fly around, see how this stacks up. Uh-oh. Had some breakup there. Did I get started? I don't know. Now, I haven't tweaked the settings on this thing here to maximize it. We'll go over here a split second. Not bad, not bad. There's some breakup there. You see some smearing there. My crosshairs are off. All right, we're gonna take it slowly over here. I don't know the penetration of this thing. It's a little bit yeah, it's breaking up a little bit. Yeah, there's some glitching. Let's go up. All right, so I can't make it that far with this current power setting. I'll have to take a look and see if we can change the settings of it on it. And the receiver, the antenna that I'm using, it's on my head, obviously. So it's all self-contained. The latency doesn't seem too bad. Definitely not bad at all. The phone is doing everything. The processing is also providing the image to me. If I go around that tree, I'm seeing breakup. All right, can I do a power loop here? All right, it's possible. Wow, that was a little disorienting there a little bit. Maybe we could optimize the antenna. Did I bring my other VRX? I have another VRX I can use as well. Don't forget, this is all open source, guys. So any VRX should work with this. And I don't remember if I brought it. That might give me better results. I don't think I brought it with me, honestly. I'll have to take a look. I'm liking the image though. The camera is sick. The breakup is getting to me a little bit. We'll have to go into the settings and tweak it a little bit. I'd say for a first experience, it's not bad. It's not optimized, as I said, but yeah, not bad. I just feel like I don't have the confidence to explore as far as I want to. Like that, you see that little delay there? When you're in close proximity to things, it really it pays to pay attention. Let's bring it in for a landing, and then I will try the HD0 goggles. This wasn't bad. This is cheap. This is like $20 all in, so not bad at all. There it is. All right. All right, so first flight, not so bad. The goggles experience, it's not bad. I'm seeing only one image, which is good. I can see a little bit of pixelation because you have the screen so close to your face, your eyeballs, but not bad overall. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up my HD0 goggles here, set up my little ground station, and then take it for a second flight with these dedicated FPV goggles and see if there's a better experience overall. All right, guys, so I have my HD0 goggles here. I have the HDMI in going into the goggles so I can see my image straight into here. We have the image recording on our phone as well. Unfortunately, the HD0 goggles can't record HDMI in, so we're gonna record with the cell phone here. Ah, crap. I gotta do some changes here. We're looking at the double image. All right, now we should be good. This is not bad. This looks like a little bit more narrow image, but not bad anyways. All right, let's take it for a flight. Is this better? I'd say so. It's less immersive. It's less immersive than the cell phone, and the resolution is a lot better. Obviously, I'm not looking at the cell phone screen directly. Almost wiped out there. My eyes are just readjusting. This looks more like a smaller movie theater than what I just saw with the cell phone, which is really crazy. Now, the performance should be a little bit better because I have the antenna on a tripod. Yeah, it's already a little bit better. Dang. I almost wiped out hitting that tree. So over here is where I have usually the issue. There's your image though. Image is still pretty good, no qualms about it. Woohoo, 2 minutes. I think the HD0 goggles is a little bit better of an experience. I think what it comes down to is the reception from the actual VTX to the VRX. How strong is that link? I do think your antenna setup is going to dictate a lot for a radio link. I'll go take a look at the image on the computer. Obviously, I just flew it. It looks pretty good. It is flyable on both the box style VR goggles or with the HD0 goggles. It is flyable. Is it the quality of all of the other manufacturers so far? I don't think so right now. They'll probably do some tweaking. And I still have to do some tweaking with my VTX in the drone, do some configuration there. But we'll do some more flying and testing overall and see if it improves overall. So I'll go back to the studio, take a look at the video, and I'll let you know my final impressions. I'm using the HD0 goggles still, 1080p this time. We'll see if this works. Let's arm this puppy, air mode, and see if there's any distance here. We have a higher power setting here. The frame rate looks a little, I don't know. It is clear, that's for sure. It is significantly clearer. Looks good, less vibration this time. But the frame rate looks a little iffy. And you can see the decode speed as well, 16 milliseconds. But we are recording in 1080p, which is different than last time. Last time we were 720p. This image looks a lot better. I'm using the same setup here with the HD0 goggles. Let's see how far we can get this time. I'm going to try to go over here and hopefully nothing crazy happens. I think this is what is expected. Just lower frame rates. But the power is significantly higher this time around. We have a lot of people in the park this time. But I can already tell you it's doing significantly better. Okay, there's some breakup there. I'm further away. This image is nice. I like this image. Look at this. This is a nice camera. Now I can increase the bit rate, but this is one, I think the downside of this processor. Maybe my phone. You can see it's 16.6 milliseconds decode speed. I'm gonna come back here and land it. It's not as smooth as the 720, clearly. 720 was at 120 frames per second, but let's go over here and see if I have the same breakup. This image is a lot better. Oh, this is significantly better. Okay, so I turned up the power in this one today, and that was my gripe with this whole thing the first time. This is pretty cool. I gotta look at the stats later on and see my data rate and see what's different. The image is sick. I'm liking this. Look how far I am this time. Behind the trees. Alright, let's land it, and I want to do some actual recording in the app. Alright, look at the image. That's a good image there. So I'm going to hit the record button. You see that red dot on top? We're going to hit it, do some recording. Alright, it's recording now. And I want to see the quality of this. And let's see how the quality looks on the DVR. Let's do one more lap. Oh, I know what happened here. We'll see if the camera tilt changed a little bit, but you can see the camera's a lot better than last time. And I still didn't change the crosshairs. You can see that. This is 60 frames per second. You can see the difference in quality there. The dog and the kid. I'm not gonna fly over them, but the image looks good. I'm impressed with this image. Imagine having a strong link with this image quality. There's the bird. There's way too many kids in here. Alright, let's go by these trees. I was having a hard time the last time with all these trees here. I still don't trust it per se, especially with the latency. We'll try it though. Hey, it did better. Significantly better. This little OSD here with the camera resolution and the megabits per second, I think that's probably a good thing to have on your screen to see when the actual data rate is going down. We'll try it one more time. 4.1. We gotta go a little lower here, but it's a kid in the court. Look at the dogs. Oh, there it goes. 3.8. It's a little delayed. There's that image breaking up. This is the known interference spot here. I'll dip down a little bit lower here. Yeah, that's terrible. So let's get out of there. Alright, that's cool. We'll take a look at that DVR here shortly and see how it is. We're gonna put it back to 720p, 120, and see how it looks. I can tell you right now, this is a lot clearer than what it was before. Not bad. Looks good. Alright guys, not bad. We'll do this over again with 720p and see how it looks. I like this sensor though, it's pretty cool. Alright guys, we are now recording here in 720p at I think 60 frames per second, so not the default at 120. Let's go. It's gonna feel snappier. Definitely snappier. I have a little bit more confidence with this one. It's less delayed. Definitely. Alright, let's go over here and see if it holds on to the image a little bit better than the I could go on my phone and try to change the settings on this to back to 720 at 120. That feels good. That feels real good. It's amazing what a little tweaking can do. Let's go around this gazebo a little bit here. So let's see how it feels now. Yeah, a lot better. It's a little iffy when I go over here. This crosshair is definitely tripping me out. Yeah, the resolution is definitely lower here. Yeah, and it breaks up as you go there. I'm gonna use my cell phone here to try to change the settings and maybe take it for one more flight. Jesus. So this is the default setting here, 720p at 120, and I have the VTX at max power here, so we'll see if we get extra range. All right, so we're here at 120. It feels good. See why they shipped this with 720, 120, but let's see. Oh, it's already breaking up. Let's see here. Let's go around this tree first. That was smearing there earlier. Felt the wrath of the breakup. That was almost unflyable there. I think once you get above like 3/4 of the power, it makes no difference. But it is definitely snappier. We started off with the highest resolution, and here we are with 720p. You see that little smearing there? You can see my phone is doing a little bit worse of a job. Now we're up to around 10.7 decode speed. And that's probably because my phone is in the sun here, and I'm doing screen recording and recording on the DVR here, so the phone is gonna throttle the processor. So probably something a VRX or a goggle can take care of. All right, that was a really good day of testing. I'm gonna go back to the studio, take a look at this footage, and see if it's any different. I think it should be better. All right, let's go check it out. Okay, so we're back from our flight test, and the Wi-Fi Link2 did a really good job. Now, I have a lot to say, so stick with me here, and I'll try to get through the more interesting and juicy parts and leave the rest for the end. Okay, now the biggest thing for me during my days and weeks of testing was changing the setting both on the VTX as well as the VRX, which is this antenna here, and the app on my cell phone. Now the VRX is pretty simple, the setting is straightforward on the screen. Now the VTX is a little bit difficult, and in the past or the first generation of Open IPC hardware, you kind of had to use this dongle here, connect to your computer, and connect to the Open IPC configurator to change the settings on this. Now, I have to be honest, after doing that install video where I installed this VTX in this drone, guys, I was so excited. I went straight to the park after filming that video and then just took this for a flight with the factory default settings, guys. And as you can see in the first flight, there was a little bit of vibration in the image, and that was more of a user or installation error versus the actual product right here. Now, subsequent flights on my 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th flights, you can see that the image, the vibration is now smooth and there's no more vibration in the image. So that was just a tweaking of the installation of this camera on here. Now, my first or initial impressions of the image was pretty good, guys. Pretty standard, nothing kind of stood out. Pretty much as you would expect for any Open IPC camera. High contrast, a lot of saturation. The image quality or resolution wasn't that great, wasn't really high. We're looking at something a little bit above analog, but not as good as, say, Walk Snail or DJI, obviously. Kind of what you expected. The only thing that stood out to me, guys, was two things. First, we had MSP OSD. So I had OSD straight in my goggles. I could see all the telemetry from my drone, and that was done from the factory, guys. So that's a welcome sign to see. You just plug this into your drone and you have everything set up. And the second thing also was that I did see a huge reduction in range and penetration. And I didn't know why that was happening. I kind of flew the drone around and I would get some breakup in my goggles. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. Now, after the initial day of flying, I came back to the studio here and did some tweaking of the settings on here, only because it was obvious this wasn't set up for my style of flying. And what I mean by that is this can be changed depending on what you prioritize, guys. If you're more like a racer kind of pilot and you don't really care about range and penetration, you want lower latency, you can alter the settings to prioritize that. But if you're the pilot that wants a higher image quality, higher resolution, you want less breakup at the sacrifice of latency, you can also do that as well. Now, this is where we had most of our time spent. Now, in the first generation products, you had to go into the Open IPC configurator on your computer and change the settings on this. Now, I did attempt that because I did know that I wanted to change the settings on this. I wanted some better resolution. I wanted to tweak the image. It was just bothering me that the saturation was so high and it was so contrasty, and it was just giving me a weird look. And I did attempt the Ethernet cable here to connect to my computer. And guys, I spent probably over an hour and a half to 2 hours, literally 2 hours, trying to have this thing work on the computer, guys. And I still couldn't get it to work. So this is where we're talking about software with Open IPC. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the conclusion of this video. But my recommendation is to just skip the Open IPC configurator as a whole, at least at this point in time. And it's not because the configurator isn't good or isn't user-friendly, but it takes a lot of steps. You have to be very computer savvy to connect this to your computer. So the connection between the drone and the computer requires a lot of settings, a lot of knowledge, and it requires precision. If you just mistake one number, say your IP address, or one setting, it's just not gonna connect, guys. And that's where I kind of stumbled upon another way to change the settings on the VTX. Now, with this new firmware in here, you can use what we call I'm gonna call the SD card method of changing your settings on here. And it's as simply as just putting your SD card into the slot right here in your VTX, powering up the drone, and it's gonna generate a config file. And that config file is pretty much like a text file showing you all the settings in the VTX and camera. And you can just change the parameters on that file, put it back into the actual VTX, and then you can change the settings that way. And this thing can change pretty much everything. We're talking about camera settings, hue, resolution, contrast. You can change the VTX power, you can change the channel, you can change the resolution and frame rates, guys. Anything you wanna do with this can be done with that. And I've actually used this process for the majority of my testing over the past week or so, 2 weeks. With this even newer firmware here, I have the latest firmware on this one here. It was actually shipped with this firmware. And this is where the developers are making strides with Open IPC. They've actually introduced stick commands using the actual Betaflight flight controller here. So just like using like HD0 stick commands, you put your 2 sticks downward and in, and then you can enter the actual menu for the VTX and the camera, and you can actually change the settings that way. It's pretty nice and easy. I actually prefer the SD card method only because I can see the actual range of settings. In other words, if you want to go to a different resolution, say 720p at 60 frames per second, how do I know that there's a 1080p at 60 or 1080p at 120? I don't know using the stick commands. But with this file here, I can see all the options, all the ranges. The same thing with the power settings. It's not a clear and cut power setting. I think on the stick commands, it's like power 1, 2, 3, or 4. But with the actual SD card method, you can actually see, okay, it's this dBm with this level. Same thing with the channels as well. You see all your available channels, channel 161. And it's pretty cool to see with the SD card, guys. But if you are in the field and you're in a bind, the stick commands work just as well, guys. With that said, I did take a look at the factory settings on this SD card, and that was pretty much the primary reason for my lack of range and penetration. I thought it was kind of weird that the first generation model had better range, and this thing is set from the factory with the lowest power output from the factory, guys. So I did change some settings on here. I did change some camera settings for hue and for some contrast, as well as increasing the power on this to around, I think, 3rd from the highest, and I went out for another flight. Having said that, my range and penetration has increased tremendously, and it's kind of back on par to where the first generation products were when I did my initial testing of the Open IPC system. Okay, now that leads us to the actual flight test. Now I did my testing here with 2 goggles. Obviously you saw in the last video I had my homemade VR goggles using a cell phone. And this is pretty ingenious, guys, and really affordable. Now, if you can't afford a VRX or maybe the goggles that's supposed to be out here in the next couple months or so, then this is a really okay option. Some people just don't want to fly with a tablet in their hands or putting this to their face. It just really isn't a realistic situation here. So you can actually use your cell phone and use a VR goggles to make that work. Now, I've done that in the previous video. If you're interested in that, I'll either be a link above and below so you can take a look at it. Now, I did do my first flight with this VR goggles, and then later flights with the more expensive and premium HD0 goggles. This thing is around $600, but this thing was made specifically for FPV flying. Now, initial thoughts on the VR goggles, it wasn't that bad. The first thing you have to know is that you have to optimize your phone for this kind of flying. And your performance is obviously going to vary depending on the phone that you have, whether it's a new, old phone or a high spec phone. This is pretty much a flagship phone, less than almost a year, maybe a year old. This is the S24 Ultra, and it did a pretty good job, but I did have to optimize it, meaning I did set the brightness to what I felt was comfortable for my eyes. I did lock that in. I also had to increase the screen resolution. Now, these phones come from the factory kind of with the optimized or balanced performance, where you have medium screen resolution that gives you good performance and efficiency from the phone. In this case, I had to crank it up to the highest resolution because technically you are flying with this thing inches from your eyeballs, guys. And I knew that was gonna happen. So my experience here was that I could see just a little bit of pixelation in the screen. Obviously, these goggles kind of magnifies the image on the screen. We have some magnifying glass in here. It's kind of hard to see, but and I did also tweak the actual settings in the app. The Pixel Pilot app is amazing. You can change the actual distance from the 2 images and actually resize the actual VR image for each screen in your goggles. Initially, it was just too big. It was too wide, and I could see all the pixels. And that was the initial flight after I installed this in my drone. I just went out and flew it. But on subsequent flights, I did tweak the settings on here, kind of shrink that image a little bit more so that I have a smaller field of view in the goggles. And it wasn't that bad, guys. Now, the phone is doing everything, meaning it's doing the processing of the actual image here, as well as transmitting to the screen here. I would assume that the actual latency would be better on this because the screen is actually generating the image versus going to an HDMI cable and then to another screen like in the HD0 goggles. So there's no way for me to test that initially, but overall the latency wasn't bad, guys. The experience wasn't bad. And for $20 to $23, this is a really good way to get into the hobby, guys. This is a cheap way to get into the hobby. This thing is around 60 bucks, 20, 25 bucks. So you're looking around $85 all in on the Open IPC. I have no light leaks with this. It worked pretty well. I did have the antenna right here on the front. I have some Velcro on here. I just plugged it straight into the phone. It wasn't bad, guys. It was okay. Now, in subsequent flights, I did use the HD0 goggles using the method I kind of demonstrated in my first generation of Open IPC products, and that's possible here with the HDMI in right here. Now, I did have a little bit different of an experience with the HD0 goggles. The field of view was a little bit tighter. It wasn't more like an immersive feel, like a big theater. And that's cool. I also had better resolution with these goggles. These things are made specifically for FPV flying. And there wasn't a lot of pixelations in the screen. This is obviously a 1080p goggles. And I think it did a really good job with that. Now with the HDMI in here, I didn't really notice any additional latency. It felt very similar to the actual VR goggles as far as, you know, response on the drone. Now there was some breakup in my flight test. As I mentioned before, I did have decreased range on the first 3 flights, only because I was in default factory settings. And just like before in the first gen products, we did get some smearing in the image once that image did break up, more on the bottom and the side, but you can fly through it. Now, unfortunately, guys, you couldn't see that in the actual DVR. My first 3 flights, I did recording straight to the app, and it has a built-in DVR. It works really well. It does record the OSD. But using the H.265 codec, when I do put it into my editor or any kind of reader it does show it as drop frames. So although in my goggles, I'm seeing some smearing when I have a breakup, in the actual DVR, it comes up as no image or lost frames. So you'll see a flight be flying, then just blank, nothing. It will just freeze, and then it will resume again once it has signal again. And that's just the DVR trying to get the information to the actual recorder here. I guess my suggestion would be, if you want to record in your goggles or do a screen grab or screen record to demonstrate that, that's fine. I will probably try to experiment with H.264 and see if that does the same thing. It's no harm or there's no downsides to those lost frames, except for me as I'm editing the video. Lost frames doesn't do any good to me trying to sync this image with the other flight footage. Okay, so after my first 3 tests, I came back to the studio and did some tweaking of the settings. Now, this is the more interesting part of this whole testing here. I was able to change the settings on this VTX using this method as well as the stick commands. And that's where I got some pretty cool and interesting results. Now, on subsequent flights, I did increase the power output on the VTX, so now I had better range and penetration, but I also increased the resolution of the camera. Now, instead of 720p at around 120 frames per second, I did bump it up to around 1080p at 60 frames per second. And this is where you saw the other screen recording and the image. Now, that image was, guys, it was surprisingly good, guys. The image was really good in my goggles, guys, and even better in the DVR. I'm kind of liking the sensor on this drone, guys, especially for daytime flying. Now, I haven't done any nighttime flying, but initially I thought it was kind of muddled at 720p, but this sensor is pretty decent in daytime. And yes, I did tweak the camera settings. I did reduce the contrast and the saturation. And I'm also flying in 1080p, but I was pleasantly surprised. I would say I have to do a side-by-side comparison. I want to say it looks somewhat closer to Walk Snail at this point at 1080p. But the flight experience was okay. There was it wasn't dramatic, but there was a difference in, say, smoothness in the image. It wasn't as snappy and smooth as the 720p at 120, and that makes sense, the lower frame rate. But at this point, you know, you're sending more data to your VRX and your phone to process. You're talking about a 1080p at 60 frames per second. Your phone processor has to do a lot more work to process that image. And I did see some more stuttering in the image and not as smooth as 720p at 120. And there's numerous factors for that. At this point, this phone was already outside in the sun. It was a little bit warm. And I do suspect that the processor on the phone was kind of throttling the processing of the image here. Your performance will vary depending on the phone that you use, the temperature, and how much data you're sending from the VTX to the VRX. Now, I do think that this is going to be the limiting factor in Open IPC as a whole, is the baud rate and how much information you're sending. And this is kind of true because I did some testing actually before I went outside. And while I was tweaking the settings, I said, okay, let's try 1080p at 60, but let's increase the baud rate. And guys, the bitrate was higher and my phone kind of froze up. All I got was an initial image and just some smearing all over the screen. And I'll leave that image on the screen so you can take a look at it, but there was little to no response on my phone. So I said, oh crap, the phone probably can't handle it. It can't process that data. Let's reduce it back to the lowest baud rate or data rate, which is what this thing comes with from the factory. That kind of confirms that, yes, they did send this thing. Well, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but it does confirm that the limiting factor is your processing, your VRX, guys. And we'll talk about that just a little bit later. Now, I did have the other file on my SD card, but I also wanted to try 720p at 60, do the exact opposite. If this was too much information for my phone, if I could reduce the data rate or the bit rate going to my phone, then I should have a smoother experience. So I went to 720p at 60 frames per second. And yes, it was significantly snappier than the 1080p at 60, obviously less resolution, less data to process, and it flew pretty well. I didn't really notice a big difference in range and penetration. I have to say, it didn't feel as smooth as 720p at 120, which is the default setting on this. And I do suspect that's the reason why most of the developers or Runcam has set it to 720p at 120. That's pretty much the optimum or the most efficient, giving you a balance of performance and low latency while you're flying this in that setting. So it's not a bad setting, but if you want more resolution, you can obviously change that. Now, as far as range and penetration, I did fly this on the 3rd to highest setting. And yes, I did get increased performance over the default setting, which is the lowest power setting on the VTX. But I didn't see any discernible difference between the 3rd from the top, then the 2nd from the top, and then the highest power setting. Those 3 settings here, to me, delivered the same performance. And maybe if you have one of those immersion RC power testers, you can test the power on these. Now, I have to say also as well, I had some concerns initially on the first day that, hey, this performance isn't as good as the 1st generation product. I also used the Emax VRX. Now that you can actually change the settings on this, change the channel, it doesn't really matter. This is all open source. So you can use a hardware from another manufacturer and see if you get any difference in performance. And using this right here, I got similar performance than with this antenna right here. This one is a little bit more cumbersome, a little bit bigger, but this one does require a power source, while this doesn't require. You can just plug this straight to your phone or tablet, and it's powered via the USB-C. And this one here requires a specific power source. So there's a trade-off depending on what you use. Okay, so overall, what are my thoughts on the Wi-Fi Link2 and Open IPC as a whole compared to the original system released 6 to 7 months ago? Well, I do think they've made some huge strides, guys, and they're obviously listening to the pilot group. So I highly recommend you leave your thoughts and comments about the system down below in the comment section. Not only at my video, but your favorite creator as well, because Runcam and the developers, guys, or manufacturers will take those into consideration in future models, as well as firmware upgrades, guys. So your thought really matters, and that's the beauty of open source products, guys. Now, as far as my thoughts, I do think that this is a huge improvement over the previous product. This is a more refined, a more smaller and compact kind of setup here. And this thing just works straight out the box with my cell phone, my tablet, even my computer, guys. Even the MS OSD works straight out of the box. So you just have to plug it into your VTX or your flight controller and you're good to go. At this point, guys, it just works. And as I said before in my first impression videos, I do think that the hardware here is set, it's good to go. This VTX looks really good, it looks durable, the camera is really fine, especially in 1080p. So I think the hardware here is set. We just have to work on pretty much the kind of firmware, the configurator, the thing to change the settings on this. Now, the Open IPC configurator isn't bad by any means, but to get this to connect to the configurator is where we have more confusion, more difficulty. And as I said before, if you get anything wrong, it could be a deterrent, guys. It's just not gonna work. I am looking forward to a day where I can just plug this into my cell phone with a USB-C cable, or maybe Wi-Fi, and change the settings on this and update the firmware on this. Now, I do understand that this is an IP camera, hence the reason why we have this Ethernet cable on here, but it'd be cool to just plug it into a tablet and just update the firmware that way. Now, I do think that there's a possibility, or there is a way to actually update the firmware using the SD card method here. Guys, for the most part, you don't really need the configurator. You can do all the settings with this or with the stick commands, but I still think that you might need that to update the firmware on the camera. Okay, so what's next and what is the future for Open IPC? Well, I do think the next step is to get VRXs and dedicated goggles out there to the pilot group so that we can actually test these things and give more feedback to the manufacturers and developers as a whole. This is the beauty of open source. And guys, I do think that a lot of people want to get into this hobby, especially this protocol right here, because it's so cheap, it's so affordable, and it works relatively well. But they're kind of hesitant because you have to deal with this and plug this into the computer and do some IP address. It's kind of a deterrent. Guys just want to just put this to the goggles, or just wear goggles, power this up, and have it work, guys. So I do think the next step is VRXs and dedicated goggles. The good news is that Emax and Runcam is supposed to be releasing some VRX and hopefully some goggles in the near future. And to be honest with you guys, I literally just got mine literally 5 minutes before I record this video. So I'll be cracking this thing open and taking a look at it and then seeing how it works with different settings with this VTX. So you guys know what to do. If you want to see that video, guys, just hit that subscribe button. You'll be the first to know whenever I do drop that video. I might just dive into it literally once I finish this video here. So having said that, what are my predictions for Open IPC? Now, I typically don't give this because this is more of an opinion-based part of the video. This is just my opinions entirely and not factual. But what do I think about Open IPC in the future. Now, I do think that this is going to be a good case study, or a case where it's the situation of the have and the have-nots. And what I mean by that is that manufacturers, when they make hardware, let's say for example a VRX, they're going to try to find a good balance between performance and efficiency and affordability. They want the device, the hardware, to work relatively well, but not cost a lot of money for them to make and for you, the consumer, guys. So if it doesn't work well, you're not going to buy it, and if it's too expensive, you're still not going to buy it, but it still has to work well or good enough for you. So based upon my initial testing right here, it looks like Open IPC is pretty much dependent on processing power, or how well it can decode the information. It's pretty much how fast you can process the information. That all comes down to the SoC and how well it can do it. Now, just like certain other manufacturers, let's say Apple, they were all based on Intel processors and eventually went to their own processors optimized for their operating system. Until we get to that point where we have a chip that is optimized for Open IPC, I do think you'll see manufacturers kind of try to straddle that line, maybe offer different products, different price points. Maybe you have a processor here or a VRX or goggles that can do it at a pretty affordable price, but not the best performance. And then on this side, have a really high-end processor that can really decode this really fast and have the higher decode speeds for higher resolution and faster refresh rates, guys. But that's going to be more expensive. So if you're the pilot who can't really afford the more expensive one, you might have to go for the cheaper version, which is pretty good. And then if you want the best of the best, you might want to spend some more money and get the better processor. So with that said, I do suspect you'll see a big variance in performance from VRXs and goggles, especially first generation goggles and VRXs. If you're an early adopter, that's fine. But I do suspect, because of the open source nature of this protocol and hobby, I do suspect with time it's gonna get significantly better. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. That's just my prediction. I do think the later products are gonna get better. I do think it's gonna get smaller, more efficient. I do think you're gonna have also probably more cameras. Don't forget, this is all open source. This is really exciting times in the hobby, especially with Open IPC. And I think everyone should be really excited. This, you know, people have doubts about, like, is it gonna be almost like Express LRS? I do see it more likely now to happen, especially that we have manufacturers on board making actual decent hardware. So yeah, that's you can see a lot of change with Open IPC, and I know the developers are super excited as well. So what do you guys think about the Wi-Fi Link2 and the performance of Open IPC so far? Leave them in the comment section down below. I'm curious to know. I am also going to be doing some more testing, only because I am really interested about the higher refresh rates, the higher baud rates, and the higher resolution. I want to see how far you can push this without having this hampering your flying, guys. Just seeing the limitations of this thing. So I'm excited to see that overall. As I said before, the developers and manufacturers want to see your comments. So be honest, you're not going to hurt my feelings. It's not my product. I'm just giving you what my experiences were with this product and Open IPC as a whole. So anyways, guys, if you're interested in this and you want to install this in your drone as well, I've done a full video showing you how to install it, and I'll leave it linked right here as well as my upcoming video on the VRX as well. Don't forget to subscribe to see that video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.